Trump sentencing day, just 10 days before being inaugurated as the president of the United States. Donald Trump sentenced with no penalty for his hush money conviction. Welcome to the Noon on this Friday. I'm Bianca Peters. The president-elect appeared virtually in a Manhattan courtroom this morning just to hear Judge Juan Merchan's historic decision. So how did we get here? It was May when Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. And then it was July when the Supreme Court granted him presidential immunity. And then in November, he was reelected president. Fox 5's Morgan Mackay live outside of the courthouse now with more on this. Morgan, you were there in court as this all unfolded. What's your takeaway?
Bianca, President-elect Donald Trump will not be facing any prison time, nor will he be forced to pay any sort of fine after Judge Juan Merchan sentenced him to unconditional discharge. But while Trump will not be facing any sort of substantial punishment, he will be a convicted felon and the first convicted felon to become president. Now, the sentencing took around 25 minutes, and Trump, who is in Florida, appeared only virtually inside the courtroom next to his lawyer. Prosecutors kicked off the proceedings by first highlighting that a jury unanimously and decisively found Trump guilty of falsifying business records in order to hide hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels in an effort to influence the 2016 presidential election. Prosecutors accused Trump of showing no remorse for his actions and say instead he has only shown disdain for the court, eroding the public's trust in the justice system. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, accused prosecutors of only bringing this case forward because Trump decided to run for president again, and confirms that they will be appealing the verdict. Now, Trump also took the opportunity to speak, calling this, quote, a very terrible experience, and called the trial, quote, an injustice of justice. He continued to insist he never did anything wrong and said the American people agreed with him since he won the popular vote this past November. Here is audio of part of that interaction in court.
I won the election in a massive landslide, and the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly.
Now, after hearing both sides, Judge Juan Merchan acknowledged what he called a paradox of a trial, acknowledging that there were protesters outside, but says once those courtroom doors closed, that Trump became like any other defendant. Now, he did acknowledge that Trump is going to be president, so he said the only sentencing that makes sense in this case is unconditional discharge. He ended the proceedings by telling Trump, quote, "Sir, I wish you Godspeed." Reporting live, I'm Morgan Mackay. Bianca, back to you.
All right, Morgan, thank you for the update on that. And joining us now to take a closer look at this historic sentencing, former Brooklyn Prosecutor Imran Ansari. Imran, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get to it. A judge has never had to make this decision like this. How do you think the judge was able to get to this point, and what helped him make this decision?
Well, I think he had the deference to the jury. This was a jury verdict, Bianca, a conviction from a jury verdict that took their time to deliberate over the evidence that was presented to them in court. And Judge Merchan really couldn't disturb that verdict. And I see that, and we see that now in his sentencing. The sentencing is logical. Donald Trump is the next president. He is the president-elect. And this is the only type of sentencing that would not interfere with his role of the presidency. So the unconditional discharge, it makes sense based on the circumstances here. But what we saw happen in court today was a acknowledgement to our justice system in terms of a jury being the finder of fact, and a verdict would not be disturbed absent an appeal. And Judge Merchan did what he had to do under the circumstances in the sentencing. He wasn't going to dismiss the case based on the applications from the defense. And here we have a individual who's going to be president of the United States, who is a now convicted felon and sentenced to this unconditional discharge. It's unprecedented, but we really saw what the justice system in terms of being upheld and a jury verdict being upheld in that courtroom today.
Imran, let me ask you a question, though, because as we move forward, now this allows him to appeal this guilty verdict, which he claims stemmed from a political witch hunt. So how do you think that will play out?
I absolutely expect that President Trump is going to appeal this conviction, and it's just in his nature, right? He is not going to take this conviction lying down, so to say. I expect that he's going to exhaust all appellate remedies to get that conviction overturned. And the next steps would be a notice of appeal and taking that to the appellate courts here in New York, perhaps up the chain and maybe up ultimately to the Supreme Court. But I expect him to do that. I don't expect him to go through the presidency with the conviction over his head. And I think the next step we will see Donald Trump in court again, but this time with this case on appeal.
Sure. I mean, still the first felon in the White House. So does this matter to the American people, yes or no?
Absolutely. And there's two factors at play here. We see him getting convicted in court. We see him sentenced today. But at the same time, Bianca, he won that election. So I see how Donald Trump is going out there and saying, well, the jury spoke in New York, in Manhattan, but the American people spoke at the ballot, at the election booth. So, you have these two competing things at play here, completely unprecedented. This is a historic moment, and we will see how it plays out when he does take that appeal. And through the 4 years of presidency, if he keeps coming back to this and citing to this as a massive injustice, for him.
All right, Imran Ansari, thanks so much for joining us and shedding some light on that.
Thanks for having me.